If one could choose a Doctor Who story that should never have been junked, it must be Marco Polo. Not because I was in it, but because the set and the costumes at that particular time were absolutely unique and I think pretty wonderful. If the episode still survived, I'm sure that this story would be a prime candidate for the latest video colorization technology. However, thanks to the dedication of Loose Canon, we are able to offer you the next best thing, a special colour reconstruction of this story. Luckily, Marco Polo is the most photographed of the early Doctor Who stories, and this reconstruction makes use of the numerous colour photographs that are in existence. The remaining black and white photos, many of which are previously unseen, have been painstakingly hand-coloured one at a time. And for those amongst you who insist that the 60s episode should be viewed in black and white, well, you can simply turn down the colour on your TV. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. I, Marco Polo, Venetian explorer and adventurer, have kept this journal for many, many years. Within these pages are maps and accounts of the many journeys that I undertook as a young man. As I reflect on my life, I have accomplished so much. I've travelled to the four corners of Asia and have walked more miles than I care to mention. I have seen sights and wonders in my many years that no one could ever have dreamt of. The magic of the Buddhist monks, strange unearthly creatures, black stones that burn, to name but a few. Strangest of all was the time I encountered four travellers with their strange caravan. Yes, I remember now. Let me tell you of that, the strangest of all adventures. It all started 35 years ago in 1289 on the plain of Pamir. Yes, that's right. The plain of Pamir, the roof of the world. Yes, I wonder where they are now, the past or the future. That was the last I ever saw of the strange travellers. I recall a discussion many years ago at the way station of Lop. Miss Wright was convinced I would see Venice again. Now, how could she have known that her prediction was to come true? 3 years after my journey with the old Doctor and his companions, I left Cathay for the last time and finally returned home to my beloved Venice in 1295. Now, in the year of our good Lord 1324, at 70 years old, my travelling days are finally over. For many years now, I have been ridiculed for my stories and subjected to endless questioning. I'm tired of it. This will be my final journal entry. Like the many skeptics I've encountered over the years, I too now find it hard to believe the many wonders I beheld during my travels. Flying caravans, travellers who journey from today into tomorrow. If only they knew. I didn't tell half of what I saw, because no one would have believed me. The story of Marco Polo is best told from a point in his later life after his return to Venice. In 1298, a long-running rivalry between Venice and Genoa culminated in a sea battle fought off Cazzola. Venice lost many ships and over 7,000 Venetian prisoners were taken, including Marco, who was commander of one of the galleys. Whilst in prison, Marco began reminiscing about his Eastern experiences. And this proved such a draw that Genoese society flocked to the prison to hear of his travels to the East and of the great Khan. Many of his tales were transcribed by Rustichello, a fellow prisoner. Rustichello was a writer of romances from Pisa and was most likely responsible for some of the more elaborate parts of the narration. The Travels was the name given to Marco Polo's published manuscripts. The absence of printing presses meant that Marco's tales were hand-copied into a variety of languages, exposing it to years of exaggeration, translation errors and misinterpretation. It is unknown in which language the original was written, maybe medieval French, possibly Latin. The oldest surviving copy is dated at 1351, over 50 years after the original. Marco's travels began when he joined his father and uncle on their return trip to the great Kublai Khan in China, a journey that was to take 3.5 years. When Niccolo introduced Marco, he presented him to the Khan as "my son and your liege man." For the next 17 years, Marco was to remain in the service of the great Khan. In Marco's account, he claims that he was governor of Yangzhou for 3 years, but the Chinese records that list the officials of Yangzhou do not appear to bear him out. One likely explanation could be from a later copyist translation error where the old word for stay is misinterpreted as governed. What is odd is the strange mix of the strong factual accounts with those which are clearly fabricated. Reports of griffins capable of flying off with an elephant in their talons share the same pages as details about the fabrics produced in each city, local customs, and practical travellers' tips. Don't drink the local water of certain areas was practical advice then, as now. It seems odd that a traveller to China would not mention the breathtaking engineering feat of the Great Wall of China, the everyday drinking of China tea, and the rather shocking practice of foot binding, none of which are reported by Marco Polo. Marco's account of the strange creatures he encountered during his travels appear initially to be creatures of fantasy. He struggles to describe unfamiliar creatures with familiar terms. He describes huge snake-like serpents up to 10 paces long, equipped with claws, teeth and bulging eyes. Those are most likely crocodiles. Marco also claims, rather boldly, to have viewed plenty of unicorns. This claim is at first rather startling until further on a detailed description is read. Being about the size of an elephant with feet like an elephant and the habit of carrying its head lowered. It soon becomes apparent that Marco is describing rhinoceros. More bizarre second-hand reports also emerge. In the kingdom of Ambri there are men with tails the size of dogs, while on the island of Andaman he tells that there are men with heads like dogs and teeth and eyes like dogs. More credible are the people of Furlek, who are said to eat human flesh. It is of course quite plausible that Marco has heard exaggerated tales of cannibalism. Marco's desire to see Venice again also appears to be based on fact, but if the Empire of the Khan was hard to get into, it was even harder to get out of. The Khan liked the Polos, especially Marco, and he did not wish to see them leave. The opportunity to return home arose when 3 ambassadors from Argun requested escorts to transport the Mongolian princess Kokachin to Persia. Finally, the Khan granted permission for the Polos to act as escorts and return home. The Khan was generous. He gave to the Polos a fleet of 14 ships, supplies for 2 years, and passport tablets to guarantee free passage through his territories. The Polos set sail for Persia in 1292. They would never see the Khan again. Marco's account of the journey is extremely vague, but be it from bad weather, pirates, cannibals, or sea monsters of the formidable company of 600 that set off, only 18 survived the journey. They finally returned to Venice in 1295. Little is known of Marco's final years. He died in 1324, leaving behind a wife and 3 daughters. To his last breath, Marco Polo stuck to his story. I hope you enjoyed the reconstruction. It certainly got pride of place in my video collection.
Doctor, I have not seen my home for 18 years. I want to go back.
But ask the Khan again.
I intend to. But this time, I shall offer him a gift so magnificent that he will not be able to refuse me.
You mean to give the doctor's caravan to him?
Yes.
During the summer of 1963, whilst the first season of Doctor Who was in pre-production, the newly appointed head of drama at the BBC, Sidney Newman, suggested to the programme's story editor, David Whittaker, that an old colleague of his, John Lucarotti, should be considered as a potential writer for the series. On Tuesday the 9th of July, Lucarotti was contracted to write a 7-part story provisionally entitled Doctor Who and a Journey to Cathay. Having previously written a 15-part CBC Canadian radio series about the travels of Marco Polo in 1956, Lucarotti was well versed about the details of Venice's most famous explorer. On the 15th of July, Aiton Whittaker, the drama group administrator, circulated a memo confirming the details about the first 3 stories that would make up the new series. A Journey to Cathay was scheduled as the 3rd story to go into production following Anthony Coburn's second script, The Robots, a story which would ultimately get pushed further and further down the schedule until it would finally be abandoned during the spring of 1964. In his memo, Whittaker also requested clarification as to which studio is going to be used to record the series, as Lime Grove, the usual venue, was due to undergo some alterations.
I understand that Studio D will probably be going out of commission for conversion in December. I would be glad to know as soon as possible which will be the replacement studio for Doctor Who, as it will clearly have a bearing on the facilities available for Journey to Cathay.
3 days later, Whittaker had drawn up a proposed schedule detailing the planned filming and recording dates for the series up to the end of 1963. At this point, it was proposed that 5 days filming at Ealing would be completed for the new story from Monday the 9th of December, with the first episode being recorded, possibly in Riverside Studio 1, on Friday the 27th of December. The problem over studios was resolved on the 23rd of July, when Terence Cook, the acting drama organiser, responded to Ayrton Whittaker's memo.
There seems to be a misapprehension as to when Studio D comes out of commission for conversion. It is not, in fact, until 1965. I have investigated the situation with programme planning, and there is apparently no alternative studio that can be offered. This means we must carry on in Studio D, and it is obviously vital that you should know in case this limitation makes Journey to Cathay an impossibility.
Luca Rotti began writing A Journey to Cathay in July 1963, but as he revealed in the chapter he wrote for Peter Haining's 1986 book, The Doctor Who File, he found the whole process somewhat difficult.
David asked for detailed storylines before I wrote the actual scripts, but, back in Mallorca, I found that by the 4th I was bogged down. I didn't know my characters, not even the Doctor. I needed to write scenes to discover them. I spent 4 hours in the local village post office trying to telephone David at the Beeb to explain my hang-up. When, finally, I spoke to him on an appalling line, he simply said, "Do it your way," which is what I did.
The director assigned to the story was Indian-born Waris Hussain, who began work casting for the series during the latter part of 1963.
I think Waris Hussain saw me I did a play for the RSC called A Penny for a Song, which was a period piece, as 18th century play by John Whiting. And he saw that. He'd been working in the theatre, and I think this was his first television. I'm not sure about that, but I think, you know, and he'd seen me in that, and he asked me to go and see him, and said, would I like to play it? So I said, yeah, you know, I mean, you don't turn down work. I mean, it was okay, playing Marco Polo, nice romantic part, nice romantic lead, you know. He told me they were going to spend a lot of money on it, and they were going to, you know, spend much more money on it than they had before. I knew Darren Nesbitt quite well, because he was a contemporary of mine. I'd worked with Bill Hartnell on a film called Heavens Above with Peter Sellers.
Good news, Geoffrey. The eviction order's just been served on. Just look at the place. They've turned it into a damn garbage dump. Now, what about the council's planning committee, Fowler?
Oh, they're all fixed, Sir Geoffrey. Should go through all right.
Do you want our legal boys to draw up the building contract?
Well, if you wouldn't mind, Sir Geoffrey, just at the moment, I prefer to have a gentleman's agreement. Seeing I'm under council myself, you know, I think it would look better.
That's the way you want it. In the meantime, we'll go through the motions of putting the job out to tender.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey, very much.
Well, my only worry was his eviction order. These local boys can be a bit sticky when it comes to splitting our families.
Nonsense. This building's going to put a lot of money into a lot of pockets around here. Nobody's going to worry his head about that Scruffy Smith family.
I went to a stage school, and I will conveniently forget this girl's name because I'm sure she won't want to be remembered for this, but she was a very pushy young girl who I was in a class with, and she went up to some ball at the Grosvenor House, I think. It was some television ball. And it's funny because I matched the story with Waris later on, and it did kind of match up. And she came in to me and she sort of said, she said, she was all a bit huffy. She said, I shouldn't really tell you this, but I spoke to somebody yesterday, and they're looking for a sort of Chinese type person for the BBC. And I said, what? She said, I'd said about you, I told him about you. He said, so she gave me the number, and I remember sort of thinking, this is a bit odd, and I actually tossed a coin, heads, tails. Heads I phone, tails I don't. I didn't know. I thought sounds so weird. So it came up, whatever it was, and I rang and I said, hello, my name is Enima. You don't know me, but my friend told me, it was really corny. My friend told me to ring you. And he said, well, yes, okay. When can I? And I actually was at that time rehearsing for Toad of Toad Hall. I was a rat and a ferret and a field mouse or something wonderful. And I remember they all, again, teased me. They said, you're going to see, because it was a Saturday, and I literally went to see Warris after a Saturday rehearsal. I think we finished at 1, and I said, you told me to come round to his house. Go round to his house? You know what that means. I got teased like mad. And so I went round to Warris's flat. It was in Fulham. And he, he's very sweet. He was a charming man, lovely person, no question. But it all seemed very odd. And he made me read this Lady Ping, that awful speech. And he said, well, yes, And he said, well, what have you done? And I said, well, not very much. And I said, well, actually, I'm a rat and a ferret at the comedy, the theatre of Toad Hall. And he said, oh, fine, well, we'll let you know, type thing. And then I think the booking department, because they had booking departments, and the booker came on, and I negotiated my fee, which has taken me years to actually move up, because they always refer you back to what God, I was cheap, and they paid me in guineas. That's how long ago it was. It was in guineas. But I said to Warris afterwards, I said, you know what? He said, oh God, he said, you were so funny, he said, because I'd been, we were looking for this is a Chinese, a young Chinese girl, and he said, everybody came up, and he said everybody had either been Susie Wong, because Susie Wong was that era. At that time, a movie, 55 Days at Peking, had just come out. He said everybody was either had been Susie Wong. They were all in 55 Days at Peking. And he said, I remember going to see 55 Days at Peking. I didn't see any of them. And he said, you marched in, and I remember because I'd bought this very natty coat from Phoenix, I think. Hello, Phoenix, do I get a special offer? And I looked like a grenadier. It was green. I was always quite weird, and it had black suede epaulettes and silver buttons. I looked like a grenadier guard in a little sort of small Busby hat, and I came from rehearsal like that. And he said everybody else had come in Cheung Sam split up to their navels, looking, and there you came, he said, looking like a little sort of toy soldier, and you hadn't been in Susie Wong, you hadn't been in 55 Days at Peking, and there you were. And he said it was so funny, but he said, yes, he said, I do remember that girl, because she said I was dancing with her, and he said she was really pushing. He kept saying, well, if you're a BBC director, you can give me a job, and he kept saying, well, no, actually. And he said, I got so kind of hassled by her. I finally said, well, actually, if you really want to know, I'm actually looking for a young Chinese girl, and you're not right. And she said, well, I shouldn't tell you this, but I go to school with a little person who looks oriental, and that is how I got the part.
Everybody was very good fun. Mark was very good fun, I seem to remember. Very dishy. Gorgeous he was. And Darren Nesbitt, a super actor. Smashing actor, such a presence. He really, I mean, the whole thing was incredibly well cast. Such a pity it's lost. Because it was, incredibly, exceptionally well cast, I think.
By the 7th of January 1964, the production schedule had been revised, and only 1 week before filming on the new story was due to begin at Ealing, it was still being planned that the story to follow A Journey to Cathay would be Malcolm Hulke's 6-part The Hidden Planet. As history only knows about the real Marco Polo and his travels through the journals he dictated to Rustichello, a fellow prisoner he met whilst incarcerated in Genoa, Luca Rotti thought it would be a good idea to have the story interspersed with fictional entries in Polo's diary. To accomplish the close-ups of Polo's hand, calligraphist John Woodcock was contracted to write the journal entries, all of which were accomplished on the morning of Thursday the 16th of January at Ealing. These would then be married up with the described route being marked out on a parchment map.
Success. My plan has worked. The strangers and their unusual caravan accompany me to Lop. Our route takes us across the roof of the world, down to the Kashgar Valley and southeast to Tarkand. Here we join the old Silk Road, along which the commerce and culture of 1,000 years has travelled to and from Cathay. I wonder what the strangers' reaction will be when I tell them what I propose to do.
Rehearsals began for the story on Monday the 27th of January at the Territorial Army Drill Hall at 239 Uxbridge Road, West 12.
It was all very new to me. I had never been inside a television studio before. And Doctor Who was obviously very new because, Bill Hartnell obviously one knew about, in the sense that, he had a huge reputation. Also Jackie Hill, William Russell, again, were household names. Mark Eden was kind of heartthrob, I think, at the time. Darren Nesbitt, again, was always the baddie. But, I was totally nonplussed, I think, to begin with, because for a first ever telly to get 7 episodes, and also a jolly good part, actually. It wasn't just a cough and a spit, So it was overwhelming. I had a wonderful director, Waris Hussain, who was extremely kind, took me aside and sort of, was as helpful as he could be. Not some of these guys who actually like bullying people. He really was kind. But Bill Hartnell, he was pretty kind of irascible, offset and on. But he said, "Oh, darling, I hear this is your first television?" And I said, "Yes," terrified. I didn't know what studio days were. And he said, "Well, word of advice, if you dry," and I thought, I was that green, but I didn't know what it meant. He said, "Look, because in those days, filming videotape was so expensive, they didn't cut unless, World War III was declared, and even then I think they would have gone on until the end if the tape hadn't run out." And we were in Lime Grove. He said, so there's no question of editing. We were practically live. We did it in 4 days. We were in studio on the 5th day, and that was it. And he said, if you dry, he said, they won't cut, No, cut what, no. He said, so just swear. And he used the F word, which I won't do for editing purposes, but he said, just say that very loudly, and they'll have to cut.
He was a grumpy man, but he was very much like the character he played, very irascible. And but if he used to, first thing he said to me when I came on, he said, "Now look here, chap. He said, they won't go back if you go wrong. So if you go wrong, swear that they've got to go back." Fortunately, I never did go wrong, but he did a few times, and he would put in a swear word, and they'd have to stop and go back. But if he had one, I remember he had one particularly bad outburst. He wasn't feeling very well, I'm sure, and he had a great shouting thing. Things were going wrong, and he was, And the next day he brought flowers for all the ladies, a little bunch of flowers, and sort of said, "Sorry about that."
And I remember Mark Eden, because I used to know my lines, and he said, "I bet you're a swot." He said, "I bet you." I remember he saying something like, he said, "I bet you have a little crumpled envelope and you go through your lines, and I bet you go through it." I said, "That's right. That's what because I was trying so hard. This was my first job. I was just really dedicated and the real goody two-shoes." But I remember, they were all kind of winging it and sort of saying, but I knew everything. I knew every dot and comma. And he said, "You're a swot, aren't you?" He said, "I bet you're a swot." I said, "Yes, I am. That's how I learn my lines." So there we go.
I suddenly realised what a pretty awful wig I had. Not that it didn't cost a lot of money. It did. Again, it was made especially for me. But I wish now that I'd insisted on using my own hair and growing it long, and I can't now remember the reason why they didn't want me to have my own hair. I had quite a lot of hair in those days, not like now. and it was quite thick, and it was dark, which was perfect for a Venetian. And I desperately wanted not to wear a wig, because I don't like wigs and I don't like moustaches. But for some reason, I'm now lost in the mists of time. I can't remember why, but they insisted on me wearing this wig. And I mean, when I see that huge, great quiff, you know, and that thing in the front, it's a bit like Melvin Bragg. But anyway, that was it. And you can actually, on some of the things, you can actually see the joint, the lace and the gum on it, you know. And working in a studio in those days, when the lights were so intense, the heat was incredible, and they couldn't turn the air conditioning on. You know, wearing a wig and heavy, and they were heavy clothes, you know. It was one of those. It was really, you know, you could feel it running down the back of your neck.
The title of the second episode, The Singing Sands, made reference to the strange noises created by the sandstorms in the Gobi Desert. But creating convincing sandstorms in the confines of Lime Grove Studio D proved to be something of a challenge.
The worst thing was that we had to do a sandstorm in the studio, which was done against black drapes and cardboard rocks. This was supposed to be in some desert in Mongolia when they were traveling to get to the port in China. And we had these wind machines, and the sandstorm, we couldn't use real sand because all the equipment would have got messed up. So they put some sort of interference on the television screen to make it look like sand. Well, the result was that it looked like everyone's aerials had blown over.
The Singing Sands, well, the Singing Sands was just a load of sawdust. And that's what happened. You know, again, in the studio, you know, you're clambering over old chairs and things. We get into studio and suddenly they built this up, and then they piled in the sawdust, and then they put on the wind machines to get the sandstorm. And I'm there with Carol Ann, you know, we're taking shelter, and the wind machine starts and everything else. And also, as I said, we didn't cut. I mean, you ran across the studio to get to your next shot. And so the next shot was whatever it was, and we had to literally race across studio. And I remember when they said cut to us, I said to Caroline, I can't see. And my eyes were just completely covered in sawdust. I mean, it's just sawdust. And she said, well, she said, hang on to me. And she literally just, you know, she took my hand, she dragged me. We ran across the studio, and she just literally threw me in front of Mark Eden, because, you know, I had to look contrite because I'd been naughty and all that. But I didn't know where he was. And they finally did cut then, and got the nurse down to wash my eyes out.
The Singing Sands barely featured the character of the Doctor, although it had not originally been scripted that way. At the start of the week, William Hartnell had fallen ill and had been unable to take part in the rehearsals. As a result, last-minute rewrites to the script were necessary to remove the Doctor as much as possible. Although Hartnell was able to attend the recording on Friday the 7th of February, his appearance was limited to one brief scene at the end of the episode.
But I mean, it was that ancient that the second or whatever had a buzzer. So if you did dry, they just buzzed. So they cut the sound, fed you the line, and then you carried on. And it was interesting because I can't remember in which episode, but Ping Cho, the Lady Ping Cho, which I quite like actually, Ping Cho sounds silly, but the Lady Ping Cho, she had this long speech about the hashashins, and which is hashish and all that. I didn't know. I mean, I was learning all the time. But she literally had pages of it. I mean, it was 2 pages. She told the story, and I remember when we got to rehearsal, you know, we'd say, "Oh God, she's off again." You know, it was like people bringing out the home movies. You know, "Oh God, she's going to do that story again." They were all sending me up rotten about that, saying, "Oh yeah, everybody, we could all have a nap now. Ping Cho's off on her story." But what happened was we were running over, and I think before we went in again to actually record, Waris came up and said, "Darling, we've got to cut." You know, because it's too long, which everybody had said anyway. And I luckily, I think the name was Penny, was on the book, and I actually, no one had told her, and I said, "Oh, Penny, hang on a minute, you know, before we go, just let you know, we're cutting, you know, we're going from page of there, and we're cutting all that middle bit. And she said, thank God you told me, because she said, I would have thought you died. I would have used the buzzer to prompt you.
For reasons unknown, for the 4th episode, The Wall of Lies, director Waris Hussein was replaced for 1 week only by John Crockett, who would later go on to direct the next historical story, The Aztecs. Documentary evidence suggests that around December 1963, the original plan was to have Richard Martin direct both this 4th episode as well as the 6th, Mighty Kublai Khan. Another person to leave the production at this stage was lighting supervisor John Triese, who would be replaced for the last 4 episodes by Howard King. Ultimately, Triese's departure would be down to various problems he perceived with Barry Newbury's set design.
And when I first showed the design to the lighting man, he refused to light it. He said, I cannot light that. There isn't a plan here, but you can just end this photograph with Ping Cho, who is belongs to the group of Mongols. She's made friends with Susan. You can just see over the top, the top of the that sloping ceiling, the studio air above it, and this was what the lighting man was complaining about. He refused to light it.
Well, he obviously did light it in the end.
No, he didn't. Someone else did. Yes.
Great spirit of cooperation.
Yes. Howard King lit it, and Howard King did lots of Doctor Who's. This is better because this shows you exactly the problem the lighting man had. Because if actors go back there, I mean, any cameraman will want his pictures, if he's lighting anyway, will want the pictures backlit so that that you get this bit of light around the back there, and it brings it. It's not a halo; it's just a rim of light which brings it forward from any dark background. And with a tent like that, you can't do it. And I suppose we can understand how he objected, but another lighting man lit it, so we were all okay.
On Thursday the 20th of February, the final day of rehearsals for The Wall of Lies, a 5-page scene set in the Sinju way station was inserted into the script for inclusion in the recording the next day.
Oh, Marco, I was just coming to have a word with you.
What about?
Well, I should have thought that was pretty obvious.
Be more explicit, Ian.
Oh, come on, Marco, we're friends, aren't we?
We were.
Well, why this sudden change? And tell me, why separate Susan and Ping Cho?
Susan's a bad influence.
Oh, you can't really mean that.
Ping Cho's first loyalty is to me. Yet she backed you against Tigana.
Perhaps that's because we were telling the truth. It is possible, you know.
On the same day, Doctor Who gained its first Radio Times cover, showing a photograph of Marco Polo, Tigana and the Doctor to time with the broadcast of the first episode. Efforts had been made to get the Radio Times to feature a Doctor Who cover to time with the very first story, but by early November 1963 the plan had been dropped by the magazine's editor due to a lack of confidence over the programme's staying power. However, when it finally did occur, this important piece of publicity for the programme did not meet with the approval of William Russell, who was already unhappy over the extra last-minute dialogue that he'd been required to learn for the new way station scene. On Sunday the 23rd, Russell wrote a letter of complaint to his agent, T. Plunkett Green, irritated by the fact that 2 of the programme's guest stars had been given preference over the rest of the regular cast for the Radio Times cover. He also complained about the last-minute script adjustments that the cast were having to deal with. The next day, Plunkett Green wrote to Donald Wilson, the head of drama serials, about his client's grievances, and later the same week Wilson sent Plunkett Green his response.
I was very sorry to hear that William Russell is unhappy. I have of course discussed this at length with Verity Lambert and would like to take the matter in 2 distinct phases. First, the Radio Times cover. I entirely agree that Russ and the other 2 regulars who are not included have got grounds for complaint here. There is no doubt at all that they have all worked beautifully together as a team, A great deal of the success of the serial is due to this, and I myself was very unhappy when I saw the Radio Times cover. At the photo call there were many pictures taken, which included all 4 of the running characters, and we had confidently expected that one of these would be used. Unfortunately for us, the Radio Times makes its own decisions, and all we can do is protest after the event. This I am doing. This is nothing to do, however, with the other matter, which is entirely a question of scripts. I know that Verity Lambert has discussed all this very thoroughly in the last 2 days with all 4 principals, and I believe that now they are feeling much happier about what she's been able to tell them of our future plans. As you will now know, it is agreed that we should continue Doctor Who for at least 52 weeks. This gives us a chance to work much further ahead in scripts and make sure that we do not again have to plunge into an unprepared job. I assure you that I will myself be watching very carefully to make sure that neither William Russell's or our own interests suffer from scripts which do not use his talents to the maximum.
It upset him very much that he wasn't on, and he should have been, I think. But, you know, the decision's not left to us. It's the people that make those decisions sometimes get it wrong. And yes, he was. He was very, very, very upset, I remember. Yeah, and I don't blame him because, you know, he was one of the stalwarts of it. And, you know, it was quite a coup to get the front of the Radio Times. For any actor to be on the front of Radio Times. But, yeah, he was left out and he was very miffed about that.
Following his work on The Wall of Lies, Crockett subsequently submitted a memo to David Whittaker suggesting some possible historical periods for the programme to exploit. Among his list were a number of ideas that would eventually make their way into future stories, such as the Viking raids on Britain, which would be incorporated into the Time Meddler, Bonnie Prince Charlie in the Highlanders, the Crusades and Richard I in the Crusade, and 18th to early 19th century Cornish smugglers and wreckers in the Smugglers. Crockett's idea of basing a story around the Romans in Britain was one that David Whittaker had already explored. As far back as September 1963, a 6-part serial to be written by Malcolm Hulke had been contemplated featuring the TARDIS's arrival in the Britain of 400 AD, as the Romans are planning to retire from the island.
What I remember mostly was the makeup, because we were Mongols. We had a gauze bits here which had ties so that it was then tied at the back of your head so that your eyes were like that. And one was like that for the whole day. And I remember sitting on the fire escape at Lime Grove, starving and in great pain because obviously you couldn't actually do very much with this particular makeup. And the other thing, with the photographs I'd just seen, make the show look quite lavish. But of course I was living in a cave, supposedly, and it was only about this big. And I came out of a hole, and my set was just a few bits of grass and a mound of sand. And so you couldn't shoot off. I mean, they had to be very tight on the shot. And I came out with my eyes all squinty and had to crouch behind these few blades of grass while Darren Nesbitt shouted at me. Well, I always thought it was rather strange because I had all this makeup and I sounded exactly like Noel Coward, I thought, when I came out. So I hadn't seen another human being for years, so how I was able to speak like that I don't know, but I did and hid behind my blade of grass. But every set was tiny. You would just turn a flat and there would be a palace, but only 2 flats of it.
For the 6th episode, Mighty Kublai Khan, Tutti Lemko's character, Kaiju, was scripted to be seen with a small monkey that would sit on his shoulder during the scene set in the Chen Ting Way station. However, the monkey proved not to be entirely cooperative.
Not so nice was the nasty little monkey that they had in it. I'm an animal lover. I adore animals. All animals. They say don't work with animals and children, and this is a case that proves the point. It was a nasty little thing. It was peeing all over the place, and it bit anybody who came anywhere near it, and it was not pleasant. It was always holding up the filming because at a particular point in the dialogue it was jumping somewhere it shouldn't have been jumping, or chattering somewhere it shouldn't have been chattering. I didn't know monkeys could chatter as much as this thing did the whole time. There you go.
We had this little spider monkey sitting on top of someone's shoulder. He was supposed to belong to one of the bandits. And the moment the wind machine started and this special effects sound started, the poor little thing got so panicked that it had a bowel movement all over everybody, including the man's shoulder, and it stank for the rest of I mean, it probably is the best use against enemies hiding in jungles that you ever want to just get a spider monkey, because it's much worse than anything you could use with gas or anything else. Anyway, that was probably the worst thing that happens, special effects affecting an actual live animal, which affected the rest of us.
I just remember the monkey because he got lost. It went up into, the things. He went, and we couldn't find him. I mean, he was just swinging around, and obviously that was on the recording between 7 and 10, and he just went for about an hour or so, and we were trying to coax him down and everything else. But we all still had to record. There was no question of waiting.
Earlier in the day, studio rehearsals commenced with the episode's opening scene as Tagana holds Susan captive to prevent the travellers leaving. As part of the action, actor Darren Nesbitt was required to lunge with a knife. However, Nesbitt accidentally caught Mark Eden with a glancing blow to his right hand, and the resulting laceration required treatment from one of the corporation's medical staff.
But I have terrible cracky knees. Which again tend to be actually, they're quite all right. Then you go into studio and I have to kneel down, they crack. I mean, they literally, one of the cast said I had castanet knees, I think. And I think we were going through the undergrowth, and I think Tutti Lemko was the bandit, and he was sort of by the fire. And I think Bill Russell and I were creeping forward, and a twig snaps and he looks up, fine, that's the cue. But Merton getting ready to crawl through the undergrowth, the twig goes snap, Merton's knees goes crack, and poor Tutti has to completely ignore that and then wait until there's some sort of minor little snap, and he goes ooh, but anyway, we had to get down, and as I said, there was no cutting or anything. And I think the other thing I had to do, when I had to kneel in front of the Khan or something, again my knees went, it's just, it's like real castanet knees.
The seventh and final episode, Assassin at Peking, went into studio on Friday the 13th of March 1964. But the day did not get off to a good start when a lift required to transport a camera dolly up to Studio D broke down and had to be repaired. A further delay of 15 minutes also ensued when the studio fireman refused to let camera rehearsals get underway due to various pieces of equipment blocking the fire passageways. As a result of the delay, Donald Wilson asked Mervyn Pinfield to provide him with a report on the hold-ups. On March the 24th, Wilson wrote a memo to Verity Lambert outlining his conclusions.
It seems to be generally understood that for years the problem of equipment storage on D stage has led to difficulty in beginning lighting on any show with a one-day stand. This has usually been overcome by a tactful PA and a realistic fireman getting together. On this occasion it seems that the old boy network sprang a leak, and the always possible situation arose when everybody decided to stick to the strict letter of the rules. There is only one way to avoid troubles of this kind, and that is to make sure that directors and designers use only the amount of space in Studio D which can be filled with sets without overflowing onto the necessary storage space. It could be said that this adds to the already difficult problem of making Doctor Who in Studio D, but my opinion is that this problem will only be exaggerated if the directors and designers demand more of the studio than it is capable of supplying.
The mere idea of being in that place, it wasn't perfect. In fact, it was pretty awful. It was very, very primitive, and the dressing rooms were bad, and the canteen was pretty dire. But I quite enjoyed it. It was there at Lime Grove that I was a great football fan, especially when I was a kid, and I was a great Spurs supporter. And I was standing in the queue to get my food, and I looked up, and I was standing next to Danny Blanchflower. Now, Danny Blanchflower was captain of Spurs and captain of Northern Ireland, and he was my idol. And I was playing the lead in this, and I think I was done up all in my gear, I'm not sure. And, I wanted to say to him, can I shake you by the hand or whatever, because this man was, when you suddenly see somebody that you've admired so much, and I couldn't say anything, and then he just got his stuff and walked away, and I thought, why didn't I just say to him, hello, I've watched you so many times, and thanks, but I didn't. But that was at Lime Grove. I don't know what he was doing there.
But I mean, I know I kind of shocked them all, because what we did, you went into studio on studio day, and then you had a recording break between 6 and 7. You did as much as you could as a technical run, having rehearsed for 4 days. You had a studio break, and then you went and recorded between 7 and 10. And it was only happened once, I have to say. But I was so naive, so green. I thought, oh, goody, supper break. And I know I look little, but I eat a lot. And I thought, oh, goody. So I went off, and I thought, oh, terrific. And I remember all of the cast looking at me. They couldn't believe, because I went out when everybody else was having a little bit of toast and tea or something, light meal. And Merton, had sort of steak and kidney pudding and chips and peas and beans and this. And I think I had something called spotted dick and custard. And they couldn't believe that, before going in for a studio, I was shoving all this stuff into my mouth. No one else eating. Oh, I've got to eat. It's time for me to eat. I have to say that, I was very leaden at the end of it, and I never actually ate that much again. But I think they were absolutely stymied. That shows how naive and green I was. Because I thought, oh, goody, supper break, I'm going to eat. And they went, what is she doing?
But we were using, I think, curved swords. Now, I'd done actually quite a few sword fights with straight, with rapiers and straight swords. But curved ones are a little bit more difficult. So that was difficult, but we did manage it. And I think it looked, as I remember, I think it looked fairly good. So Darren was quite good. We were both quite good at doing things like that, because we'd done quite a lot of that sort of thing, playing, because we were both of an age, young and kind of around, and I used to do quite a lot of my own stunts. I packed that up after I broke my ankle, but I used to, if they weren't that dangerous, I would do them. It was so much better than getting a stunt double to do it for you. But as I say, eventually I broke my ankle and lost the film because of it, so I didn't do them anymore.
Following transmission of the story, the production office received a number of letters of complaint from schools concerned about the fact that the Doctor and his companions were meeting up and interacting with real historical figures, and that this might impact upon children's comprehension of genuine historical events. For a while, the production office took the observations seriously, and as a result, a 6-part script by Maurice Fahey entitled Farewell Great Macedon, dealing with the Doctor's encounter with Alexander the Great in Babylon, was shelved. Whilst the story may not have met the absolute approval of certain teachers, it was still as enthusiastically received by the younger audience as any of the previous adventures.
We used to get letters, even then, and not a great deal, but we used to get them quite a lot from kids. And I got one, there was one episode where the last bit of the episode, Tigana, the villain, was pouring poison down the well that we were about to come to, or what the Oasis, I can't remember now. and ha ha ha, you know, Marco Polo, I can't remember exactly whether. And I got a letter in little childish handwriting saying, "Dear Marco Polo, don't drink the water in the well, Chigan has poisoned it." Oh, it was wonderful.
The story sold extremely well overseas, with 16mm film prints of all 7 episodes being distributed all over the world. On the 20th of February 1969, BBC Enterprises sent a memo to John Henderson, the assistant head of copyright, requesting that, as the rights to sell Marco Polo overseas were due to lapse on the 3rd of April that year, a further extension of sales rights for another 5 years should be obtained from John Lucarotti. As a result of this, Henderson wrote to Lucarotti's agent, Harvey Unner, to secure new rights up until April 1974. But it's interesting to note that here, as well as in previous documentation authorising payment to Lucarotti for overseas sales, the story is always referred to by its former title, Doctor Who and a Journey to Cathay. Despite its worldwide distribution, however, no copies of any of the 7 episodes are currently known to exist. A brief glimmer of hope surfaced in 1991 when fan Graham Howard was allowed access to Television New Zealand in order to check through the large stocks of overseas programmes that TVNZ had been accumulating. Howard came across a film can bearing the label Doctor Who Assassin at Peking, but sadly the film print inside was not one of the missing Doctor Who episodes.
The thing I remember mainly about it was the fun we had. Because quite often you don't have fun doing things because there's a lot of pressure with time and everything. But you know, all that dressing out, and Bill Russell is a terrible giggler and practical joker. Bill Partner wasn't, I have to say. But we had a lot of young people and you know, lots of chums were in it. And Warris was great fun. So it was a very, very happy production. That's the main thing I remember about it.
Warris was an absolute sweetie. We used to go back to his flat and we used to make music out of saucepans. We had a lovely time with him. It was great fun.
Warris would invite, you know, a load of the cast back to his house, his mother's house actually, in Fulham for dinner. And, you know, Dougie Canfield invited us round to his house in Holland Park for drinks, and you know, it was a really kind of nice, really nice atmosphere. Great. They should all be like that.